I mean agenda, but I don't have a,
Okay.
No script.
Yes,
Name?
correct, no script.
okay.
You can script this.
Okay, good afternoon. We are now commencing our 2 o'clock workshop. And I'll get to it in a minute. And the purpose of this workshop are 2 items, the Neola contract and school board auditor position. And we'll start with Neola, and if you can explain for the general public.
May I interrupt really quickly?
Oh, yes, I'm sorry, did have one thing, go ahead.
So I failed to reach consensus regarding the cost-benefit analysis of continuing to outsource legal versus hiring a new attorney. I think we had consensus, but we didn't actually go around the table. Is there consensus of the board?
Can you, for the purposes, just restate what it is we're consensus?
Asking the board attorney and superintendent to conduct a cost-benefit analysis about the outsourcing of legal versus hiring someone new.
And can we say as a part of that, that we will have the breakdown as to who we have now on retainer and who's on staff and what everybody's doing?
That would be part of the cost.
And who's on first?
Right.
I can send you the costs tomorrow, actually, I think, so, our current situation,
Yeah,
as recently, as soon as tomorrow, I believe, so.
okay, so do we want to do
have
consensus?
on that?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I know you just gave consensus, but just to clarify, and I think I understand where Ms. Patrica's at, but I just want to clarify. It's regarding an attorney to deal with construction and real estate, those areas, correct? Okay, thank you. Okay. All right. Neola, first of all, I think we have a performance at 5:45 too, just
Yes,
so,
we do.
so we have to be out of here so staff can clean this up.
Yeah, I would ask for a hard stop of 5:15. Can we ask for a hard
All
stop?
right, so we have an hour. Okay.
Yeah.
All right, so Neola,
Just so you know, Neola is the Northeast Ohio Learning Associates. It's a company that started in Ohio and spread to 5 or 6 different states. Neola is a company that does policy development for school districts in 6 states around the country, one of them being Florida. In Florida, they provide policies, templates, and work with 27 school districts, including Miami-Dade and Collier. The board asked me to do a cost-benefits analysis, which was posted as workshop materials on board docs. And that cost-benefit analysis, without getting into it, hopefully most of you have read it, I will just say this. The current status of policy development, it is very difficult to quantify how much that costs the districts in dollars and cents. And Dr. McCullers is here, Dr. Atkins is here, myself. We have all been involved in policy development for this district, some of us for over a decade, the 3 of us for over a decade. And as recently as 2 years ago, Ms. Elkin, if you know who Patty Elkin was essentially charged with supervising, if you will, the development of policies in the district. And Patty did a fantastic job. She worked with Mr. Martin and me when I was the staff attorney in some respects, and Dr. McCullers, to create some system of doing that, okay? Ms. Elkin, unfortunately, just like Dr. McCullers, retired. He will be retiring.
Look at the smile on his face.
And
Every week he looks happier.
And Dr. Atkins, at that point, chose Ms. Ralph, Soretta Ralph at the time, to sort of take over that role. And we existed that way for about a year, I think, or thereabouts. And then Ms. Ralph was reassigned and is in student assignment, as you all know. And a lot of that fell on me as the staff attorney when she left. And then I became the board attorney, and Mr. Martin left. And I have worked with staff to bring you policies. You know that as recently as last meeting, we voted on some policies. But the consistency in updating policies in the district, as the cost-benefit analysis indicates, has not been consistent. We have a huge school district with multiple departments where the subject matter experts in those areas have to be involved in the development of policies. The lawyers for the district and the wonky people like Dr. McCullers, who's fabulous, don't know everything about every department and every wheel that turns in the district. So there's staff time involved in that. My point is that's very difficult to quantify how much that costs in staff time. It is not the primary role of any individual under Dr. Atkins' purview. I mean, they're not, policy development is not someone's main job, okay? It's usually like Dr. Pruitt or others, they deal with the HR policies when they come their way or they're asked to do something, but obviously she has the job of maintaining and managing human resources in the district. So you all probably in some way have become somewhat familiar with Neola. I know they appear at FSBA meetings and you have colleagues that use them. And the cost-benefit analysis goes through the difficult thing of quantifying the costs for us currently, but there are hard costs that are in the proposal from Neola, okay? And Neola's proposal, the cost for 4 years, the base cost is just short of $100,000, $99,995 over 4 years, which is payable in installments. It's not a one upfront cost. And that price includes 120 hours of face-to-face associate consultation time, and if more than 120 hours is needed, you get billed hourly. Neola has what are called policy templates, okay? And you can go on Miami-Dade's website or any of the districts that use Neola, and you will see their templates. The districts that have Neola work with those templates and include language that is district-centric in their district with the Neola template language. Okay, so for instance, I'll use the example of student assignment. We have a very unique student assignment system in Lee County. So of course, our open student assignment plan would have to be incorporated into the Neola policy regarding student assignment. We couldn't just take their template and say, we're gonna use their policy. So having said that, as the cost-benefit analysis indicates, there still is staff time involved in this. It's not like you simply say to an agency or an entity, you're doing that for us and we don't have to do anything. There is significant staff time. In fact, the initial implementation to Neola, according to their website, would take up to possibly a year when you go through every single policy, present your policy, their template, try to marry the two together, and then bring them to you all to be approved through that process, okay? So that is a consideration. One of the big benefits that I've talked to my colleagues and received emails from them around the state is the updates that are provided by Neola. Neola updates their policies at least twice a year. And if there's a considerable amount of legislation that requires updates more frequent than that, they will do that, okay? And that also includes the first 5 updates, if you initially sign an agreement with them, are free as far as their staff time is concerned, okay? One of the other nice things about Neola is it incorporates very fluidly with board docs. So that is the system that they use to incorporate their policies for the district. I can answer any other questions you have. As I stated as the conclusion, because I don't think it's fair to do a cost, Dr. McCullers and I had an interesting conversation about this, to do a cost-benefit analysis without a conclusion, and I am not necessarily here to in any way endorse Neola, but I did say, and I do believe it's a reasonable option to provide the school board and the district with a level of protection in the area of policy development. I do believe that. And I'll be happy to facilitate a discussion, conversation, whatever you all want to do. I don't know if it's appropriate for me to call him. Go ahead.
Well, just, you know, I did have a conversation with Mr. Williams, and I am asking him to, you know, have conversation with you all when we do one-on-one meetings. He was over in Miami-Dade, and they did implement Neola over there. And he can speak to many of the advantages and disadvantages that Rob has alluded to in this one. My concern after having spoken to him is not whether or not we do Neola. the fact of the matter is that staff is the ones that will do this work. It's not Neola that comes in and does this work for us. Now, that's the positive around this is that would avoid the concerns I brought up earlier. When I saw the school district, our school district, brought in a consultant, they redid all of our policies, implemented it. It was a disaster because staff was not involved, and therefore board staff was not aware of what was in their own policy, so we're out of compliance with our policy. The other side of it, with the way I understand Neola works, is that you do work with the staff to formulate policy, because as he mentioned, you have to marry the two. You have to marry your policy with Neola's policy. Advantages would be there are policies we may not have considered that we would want to add, one of which is board staff communication, which Mr. Williams has been talking to you all about as we go around. A lot of that has significant portions that are very similar to what the Neola policy is on the same item. We didn't have that before. The disadvantage here, again, is the staff time. So if you talk about what would be a cost in terms of implementation, there are other districts that have implemented Neola that we could probably contact and say, how much time did this take? What kind of staff time did it take? Because part of my role would be to make sure that we're able to be protective enough to staff time to where this is not something that, because we're already right now, working at a pretty high level, and we are down significant staff in certain areas that would have to be a part of putting this together. So those are just my sense, my take, and my input as to this as a product.
Mr. Dillon, I have a comment. I spoke with the superintendent about this yesterday, and we were, first question I have is it an all or nothing contract, or is there an a la carte contract, or are we just in for the 99 and 4 years, or what?
The proposal is not a la carte. The proposal that's before you, and I'm not asking you today to make a decision. I want that to be clear.
No.
The proposal is you're all in. I mean, you're going to use their templates, and you're going to work with their staff, and your staff is going to work with their staff to implement their templates in marrying your policies with theirs to come up with a product. So I have not inquired if there's a la carte. I'm not aware of that. That would be quite interesting.
And to kind of explain it, in the beginning, they come in and kind of get everything all organized and work with the departments and get everything all laid out.
Mm-hmm.
And then the possibility of us, just maintaining or whatever, another option. And the thing is, when we're locked into them, we're locked into their whole process and their templates. So the question is, would another alternative possibly be to have a consultant or someone come in? And I know you said that you did that and it didn't work. I'm not aware of that. We're to bring in someone
Yeah, that was before my time.
to work on all that. And
More than 14 years ago.
so what were the negatives for that?
Well, what the consultants did at that time is they came in with really a boilerplate board policy, reviewed our policy, made recommended changes, and they were the ones that put those policies together and in a big package, and that entire package was rolled in front of the board voted on it. So staff had very little input into those policies. It actually changed many of the district procedures, standard operating procedures that were existing at the time, yet staff wasn't aware of that, so the standard operating procedures continued in accordance to the old policy. It was just a very, very poor implementation where the consultant did the work really in a unilateral fashion without a lot of staff input. I don't have that same concern here after talking to Mr. Dodick and Mr. Williams because as I understand it, staff would be very much a part of the process and would be brought along as those policies were brought before
We're
the
being
board.
done. Are there other options, or is this our only option?
I didn't explore other options because that's not what the direction that I was given was. One of the options I would love is Mr. McCullers is retiring, except I think he has to be out of contract with the district for a year because he went and dropped. So we did have that
Part of our
conversation.
legislative
Yeah.
platform.
Ms. Moore?
Yeah, one of the things I would say about using, if we're going to go with someone other than internal staff, the thing I like about Neola is when I want to find out what another district does, it's all in the same place. So you're not looking all over the policy manual to try to find comparable policies. So I think you say that it's used by 27 counties?
Yes,
Yeah.
27 districts. And FAMU and one other, the Cape City Schools.
Okay. And then,
Charters.
I guess I would ask, did you talk to any, Dr. Pruitt, who often is impacted by legislation and has a very short turnaround time, sometimes in respect to legislation, what her reaction would be to working with an outsider versus trying to do it all inside with you?
I did not. Dr. Pruitt and I have had conversations about today. I don't know if she,
Oh. Well, I'm just
you wanna
curious,
put her on
because
the
it
spot,
seems
yeah.
to me the biggest impact is on the academic area and on
HR.
HR. And so I'm just curious, what,
In most cases with ours, it's
okay.
because we're becoming compliant.
Okay. So,
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't see what you answered.
Ms. Vaughn.
Okay.
doesn't matter. It doesn't matter.
Go ahead.
Okay, well, what Ms. Morgan just said was actually one of the things that I was going to ask, because I think it's important in this particular case. Obviously, we're going to vote on the money, or that part of it, but how staff feels about it and whether they feel it's cost-effective for them, for their time, okay? Oh, okay.
It's not gonna change my staff time. I still have to spend the exact same amount of time, whether I'm using Neola or not. It's not a benefit to me at this, or to any staff, because you still have to sit down. You have to go through it all just like you do now.
Okay, so then what I would say, based on what Dr. Pruitt has just said, is that it might behoove us to do a survey among the staff members that would benefit or not from Neola, and that would solve
Can we,
that part, because
Yeah.
that's the main thing. The cost, for school board, considering how much we spend on a lot of things, doesn't sound like an unreasonable cost if it's going to save wear and tear on our staff. But if it's not, then I don't see the benefit of it. So that's one thing I would suggest, is that we get polling from the people that would be actually using this.
before we go on to the other questions, Dr. Creel is in the room, and you did mention that your two departments are the ones that would be most affected. Is that correct?
I don't know if that is.
I didn't
I
see
mean,
I
I
think there are significant
equally,
policies in
or-
that area, but so financial services is too.
Yeah, there's,
Yeah,
there's,
I know.
you've got 9 chapters with, student services has 37 items, school administration, 38 items, school board governance, 26 items, students, 37, 40 in human resources, business, 15, 4 in transportation, 2 in food and nutrition services, and facilities and maintenance has 11. That's what we have, and then once you add Neola, they're going to have probably other policies over and above what you see here.
Yeah, and I did have a second thing that I was going to say. After hearing the presentation that I referred to earlier about Governor DeSantis' changes, and he's really there are a lot of changes that are occurring. If we're going to use this, this might be a perfect time, because I see that there are probably going to be a lot of changes coming down the pike that might, benefit us more this year and next couple years than maybe it would have going back 3 or 4 years ago.
Okay.
That's it.
And Ms. Fisher?
So then, when I did my research, I didn't really find many other organizations that do this to this extent in Florida. And I think in Mr. Dodick's backup material, the updating and compliance with Florida statute would be done twice a year.
Correct.
So, and I don't think that our staff has been able to really keep up with that all the time. So with the number of policies we have, it seems to me like it would give us more of a central clearinghouse, and then put us in touch with other districts in the state. So, and of course, the importance, I was going to ask the question about, well, how much time is staff putting into that now in the various departments? And then Dr. Pruitt said staff time invested wouldn't change in her department. So, and that might be true, and staff would have to be involved because a lot of our policies would be unique to Lee County, except for those that are specifically designed to comply with the Florida statutes. So, I mean, it sounds to me like a good deal. And when I went online and researched it, I didn't really find anything that was as comprehensive or that offered something better.
Someone else over here?
So one of my questions was, when actually Kathleen brought it up, was our policies need to be in line with the law.
Correct.
So, for example of this resolution regarding the gun, if Neola had been involved, we might have, our policy could be updated and we would already kind of have this answer. Am I wrong in understanding that?
Without getting into that issue too intricately,
Yeah.
I'm not sure the Neola policy covers that specific issue either.
Okay,
Yeah.
well, that's what I wanted to know. Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
However, if something like that came up under the contract, we could contact Neola?
Sure, absolutely.
Instead of, okay.
I just have one other, I'm sorry.
Ms. Jordan, and then I'll get back to you. I'm sorry, did I overlook you?
No. I thought he was first.
Go. Oh, okay.
Well, just two things. Again, I want to reemphasize and make sure it's very, very clear. I do see whenever this is implemented, it's going to require substantial staff time. You know, Mr. Williams made that very clear. And I think we should probably get an idea, a little bit more of a better idea how much staff time that is going to take. So that's one. The second thing is that we are hammering it, we're budgeting different this year, as we're all aware. And so we're really making this point to our principals and our department directors that if you want something new, you have to give something up. And this is not budgeted in this year's budget. Mr. Blurton made sure to text me. So good CFO.
Got it.
So that's just another consideration that we need to think about.
And I will say that when you go switch over,
It's intense.
it is a major.
And with all the workshops and the going-ons right now with bargaining and everything that we're tackling right now is not the time to be delving into this. Now, maybe a little bit later, you know, but I think we should get an idea in terms of the time commitment before we go there.
Jordan?
That was my question, is what is the cost factor for staff doing that? Because I know that Mr. Williams did share that it is staff, the staff has to do this. You know, we get the templates, and they are the ones who are going to be putting all the information in there. Also, I mean, so I would like to know what that cost is as well. And then the 120 hours, is 120 hours enough time to even make this happen? I'm looking at extra.
In their proposal, they go through the steps. It's at the back of the agreement. For your reference, it's pages 17, essentially, to
apologize.
31. And one of the things they do say is that the process for the consultant work would be about 90 hours of time with your staff. So that's 90 hours is a lot of time. So, as Dr. Atkins said, that's taking his staff, the school district staff, away from other things. So that's something to certainly be aware of. And then they say the other 30 hours, one of the things that the agreement covers are administrative rules or administrative procedures, which we call process documents. Well, they would help us codify them, which would also be helpful because we have process documents in a lot of departments, which we have done since we got rid of administrative regulations, gosh, has to be 10, 11, 12 years ago, which implement the policies. So they would give us 30 hours of their time to work on those.
And then, sorry. Okay, then my other question was, and this is based on Ms. Vaughn, with all the changes that may be coming, if we are giving 5 free updates, then the rest for the biannual updates is going to cost us a chunk of money?
Yes, it's $5,600 a year.
Right,
Yes.
for everyone, okay. And then also the annual charge for this. So that is on top of all of that. We just,
Yeah.
just saying. Thank you.
So where did this come from? Okay, could you explain?
Well, no, I mean, I've just been talking about it for a long time because the old board lost track and was not updating policies. So then we went through a 2-year period where Keith Martin was working with
Various departments.
various
and me.
departments
Yeah, me.
and, what's her name?
Patty Elkin.
Patty Elkin,
Yep.
full-time, to get us back on track. And also, it was my impression that a lot of the pressure on this comes after legislation, when all the departments essentially have to sort of stop what they're doing and make sure that their policies are updated, et cetera. So I just thought it was worth exploring. Frankly, given your statement about the cost, I don't think this is something we should be pursuing at this time for this budget cycle. And I'm willing to just say, let's talk about it perhaps in the future, but in terms of how we spend our money as a board, I don't think this is a priority for this year. But, so.
And that was kind of where I was headed with what are our priorities,
Yep.
and is this one of them? I don't really see this isn't what I'm asking for in terms of a cost-benefit analysis for the attorney. Like, what are we spending now?
Yeah.
Right.
Difficult doesn't mean impossible. Difficult to ascertain. Like, what questions were asked of staff in terms of how much time do you put into this? Is it 90 hours at $15 an hour? Is it 90? Like, I have no idea what we're spending now, but I have a pretty good idea of what the service is going to cost, but I have no idea what the future staff costs are once we implement the service. So I can't even have a conversation without knowing what the costs are. So I feel like I need a better feel for costs. And for me, this is not a priority in this moment. The next item on the agenda is a much bigger priority in terms of where we're headed and what that entails, and putting together a plan for that. And unfortunately, that's going to take up a lot of staff time too. And this, to me, isn't quite there.
I agree.
So.
Are we at the point that we can take consensus to table this for the future? Comments? And is protocol-wise, is that what we do,
I'd be
is
willing
just
to
do a
revisit it later.
consensus? I'm sorry.
I would be willing to revisit it at a later time, not at this moment.
So it is not a motion, it's just a consensus?
No, you're good. I understand.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is everyone in
I
agreement then?
wasn't, like I
just
said, advocating one way or the other, so.
The table until later. Okay, great. Okay, let's move on to school board auditor position, and we're back at you, sir.
Okay. The legislation that was passed last year provides for, the language used to have the word may, so a school board may employ a board auditor. And at one time, historically, this district did. And I think the board auditor was here for 2 or 3 years, and then the board, that individual left, and the board essentially suspended the position, so to speak. And so the legislature last session passed House Bill 1279, which includes language that a school board shall employ a internal auditor is the word they use, or the words they use, and for a school district that has a budget of over $500 million, which we do. And so the requirement, the individual must be in place by July 1st of 2019. So we sit here on February 26th and need to discuss how the board wants to go about doing that. I will tell the board that we do have an internal audit function in the district. Mr. Brown does auditing for the district with regard to, and I want to use the words from the legislative final bill analysis, which indicates that Mr. Brown's function is, would not be currently in compliance. He only performs audits of school internal funds and he's not required to comply with externally established auditing standards. And that's from the House of Representatives final bill analysis. So there's options as to how you could go about employing someone. You have Mr. Brown and his office. You could employ independently an auditor. You could change Mr. Brown's role and hire some specific auditors for specific types of audits relative to human resources and IT in various areas. So I'm here to facilitate the conversation, but this would be theoretically a school board employee, like Dr. Atkins and I, like the superintendent and board attorney. And your protocols, although they don't address a board auditor, call for you all to have a workshop to figure out how you're going to go about filling that position. I asked Dr. Pruitt to be here because there may be some HR function relative to how you all want to go about doing this. So,
First question I had
Sure.
is, I thought that the bill said the auditor was reporting to the board and not the superintendent.
it says that, yes, it does, or designee. However, of course, the board could, if you wanted to, designate someone else for that person to report to. But yes, it does say, it's actually under the statute that is school board duties.
Right.
So, not superintendent duties.
Because I think some of them might report to like the chief counsel. in the
Yes,
school
that's
district.
correct. At least one county does report to general counsel. One district, Orange County.
Go ahead.
To kind of take this step by step, I'm suggesting that we choose either starting with the current policy or the current job description and kind of go through those and see, since the district did employ an auditor once upon a time, if there's any pieces of that, any or all, that we could use right now instead of totally reinventing the wheel. So,
It's your pleasure, whatever you like.
think.
If we can go quickly through that, then I concur. Anyone else have any issues? Which one do you want to start with the job? I'm thinking you start with the policy to know exactly what it is we have to have, and then go to the job description. I'm not sure. Suggest.
Well, I think it's important to look at the statute and what it requires.
Shoot, and then go to what we have.
So, let me just locate the statute. And I believe you all received Ms. Morgan and Ms. Fisher's comments, correct?
No.
I had computer issues.
They
so-
emailed them to you yesterday.
No, I have computer issues, so.
Okay. And I just,
I got them. And I wanted to thank you.
Oh, I did.
But
Yeah.
I couldn't
was-
respond, so thank you. You put a lot of work into that.
and I just
And
want to pull up this.
Ms. Fisher, I had the same questions you had.
Okay.
Okay, so to move this along, we're looking at,
I'm just getting to the
oh,
statute.
I'm sorry.
so.
Go
Ms.
ahead.
Fisher, we shared a brain on an issue. Can you
How
believe
about
it?
that?
Can you believe it?
It's starting to get scary. Yeah.
Okay.
You want to just?
I have it somewhere. No, I got it here now.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Okay, so if you look at the statute, they added all of this language last session to require that the internal auditor perform ongoing financial verification of the financial records of the school district, a comprehensive risk assessment of all areas of the school system every 5 years, and other audits and reviews as the district school board directs for determining. And then it has a list of A through H, okay? So the current board policy doesn't outline that, does not.
Is
So-
it possible to show where on the current, bless you, current board policy, A is, mentioned, or B is mentioned?
Well, I think what I would recommend, if we're going to amend the policy, which I'm hearing some desire to do, is that we include the language from the statute in the
Right.
policy.
Seems the best
Yeah,
way to do it.
so I can obviously certainly go ahead and do that in draft form and send it to you all. The other piece of this, though, that's important relative to the policy is the second sentence. Actually, the first sentence, the position of school board internal auditor is not presently filled. So you all would have to amend that language depending on what you want to do. Because I did give you some options relative to Mr. Brown, and I'd appreciate your thoughts on that.
Go ahead.
Well, I have, I've met Mr. Brown, and he seems like he does an excellent job with the internal auditing of the schools, but my personal preference would be to bring in someone new, someone who's new to the district. Now, if we have to have an interim, because we have to have this in place by the 1st of July, that's another matter. But I would just assume, because this person is going to be reporting directly to the board, and that's something that I would be, very stringent on, that it's a board employee. And I just think that when you have a long-time employee, such as Mr. Brown, and this is in no way to denigrate him at all, but it's my personal opinion that when you have a long-term employee, that sometimes those fidelities rest with people other than the board. And that's why I would have that opinion to bring in somebody new.
Okay.
Well, I guess I come at it from a different angle. I would like somebody who's qualified to hire consultants to come in from the outside and use best business practices to evaluate those areas that we, as educators, should not be engaged in: transportation, finance, maintenance, food service,
Right.
all of that
Oh,
stuff.
okay.
I mean, that's really where I'm driving, and I don't know whether we have the internal capacity to do that, or whether that's, whether that's external.
My thought was, and I've talked to some other districts that have auditors, is to look at not hiring an individual, but a firm. Because that way the firm would have everyone at their fingertips if they do have something in construction or something in some other area. Otherwise, we're looking at, just like you said, finding and hiring someone else to do this particular thing or that particular thing. If we have one agency, so to speak, then they have everything there in-house. The opposite to that is if we have one person, we're going to be continually having stuff brought before us. Okay, we want to hire this group, so we got to go through all of that. I'm thinking a one-stop shop, to have a firm that can handle all of the aspects, that is familiar with education and all of the areas that we have that we will need.
Can I give a little bit of advice in response to that?
Yes.
At the bottom of the statute, I just want to point out, under number 2, it says the internal auditor shall prepare audit reports of his or her findings. which would suggest that it's an individual.
Right.
I understand the desire to hire a firm, and I heard Ms. Morgan, I think, suggesting maybe a staff member would facilitate that. So that may be the person giving the reports. I'm just thinking out loud with you all. But I'm not sure the legislation, the way the law is written, contemplates hiring XYZ auditing firm as the internal auditor.
Well, but then we would have like a specific person that would work with our account, so to speak. And so we would have one individual potentially that could come and report to us. And the only aspect is it expands their ability to get answers quickly and easily and not have to hire another firm if there's a situation in an area that they're not familiar with. What is everyone else? Yes, Mr.
Okay. I also spoke to different districts as well, and a lot of them that I have spoken to, they do have the internal auditors. Most of them have a department of maybe 5 people within that department, because of course one person cannot possibly handle all of this. And when I was speaking to them, they were, sharing some of their information as far as they had one, for instance, has a director, has 2 full-time auditors, has one who is like half the time an auditor, half the time administration. One just does fixed access, and then they have a part-time student. So, because my concern was, what do you do for 365 days? Are you auditing for 365 days? Because we have to hire a person. What is that person? What does that look like? What is this person doing? And then they also said that they do actually help with like fraud and different types of training. So they do a lot more than just that. But they also do what Mr. Brown does with the schools. So they just consolidated that and put it together. And then what they did was they came up with, to keep their independence, they came up with a charter, which they've sent me their charter, for the internet, for their departments. So they have a charter that separates them from.
What district is that, Mr. Wood?
It's Escambia.
Escambia, sure.
Yeah, so they sent that to me this morning.
Well,
But they also have a committee, which is one that who's a part of this. The charter is an internal auditor, someone from the PTA, someone from the foundation, someone at large, and someone that the superintendent would recommend as well.
Is that an auditing committee?
Yes, their auditing committee, yes. So that is how they come up with theirs.
Comments from anyone else? One comment to what you said is that, and I'm not just trying to push a firm, but in answer to your question, what would they do for 365 days? If it were a firm, we would contract for the time used, rather than having them on staff to be in some of the.
And I asked that. I said, what do you do for 365 days? And the people that I had conversations with, they do a risk assessment. They go to every department. They have 10 questions that they go out to each department and they speak to which they sent that to me as well, that they go and so they're always assessing, the different departments to look for inefficiencies, to look for, different things. And then, of course, whatever is brought to them or asked of them, then, of course, they do that. And if there's other issues that they can help with, they assist as well. Okay. So they said they're busy with 365 days. Right. That's what they told me.
So I have a question for Mr. Dodig. Number 3, any person responsible for furnishing or producing any book, record, paper, et cetera, or sufficient information necessary to conduct a proper audit, which the internal auditor is by law authorized to perform, is subject to the provisions of 11.473 and 4. Can you explain that?
11.473
and 4
is the penalties for failure to make a proper audit or examination, making a false report, failing to produce documents or information.
So then, would we be talking about people in the departments, bookkeepers, those people that the auditor might collect information from?
Theoretically, if they fail to produce information for the auditor, yes.
Okay. So I think there are some firms that do specialize in school district auditing. When I did my research, a lot of the counties that have multiple people involved in their auditing departments did not report to the board. They reported to the superintendent or to someone like general counsel or that kind of thing. And it does say report to the board or designee. So I particularly support Mrs. Morgan's suggestion that, you know, we have someone who's the designee or the employee of the board who would then have the ability, when necessary, to contract out for transportation, for maintenance, for food services, auditors who would have expertise in those areas, because it seems to me like that would be the most efficient.
Can we do a cost analysis on that as to whether, or have any way to find out, is it more cost effective to have the singular person that contracts out, or have the one firm that has everything available? Ms. Giovanelli, you had a question.
Well, you asked a question.
Okay.
Did you want him to answer that, your question?
Oh, your question?
Yeah.
Well, the current policy even permits, and I think the statute has flexibility where if you had an internal auditor that wanted to farm out, for instance, a transportation audit because they don't have expertise in that area, and we've done that in this district, that certainly that individual, and the policy currently allows it also. I mean, I think you would have the ability to do that, yes. I mean, similarly, I will just use the school board attorney. I certainly have been practicing for almost 25 years, but I don't have expertise in every area that touches this school district. So you've asked about costs for attorneys outside. Well, there are things that we have to use outside counsel for, because Brian nor I have expertise in every area. Similar for an auditor, I suspect.
Right, and that goes back to what you had asked earlier about a cost analysis for that. Yes.
So for me, I was kind of thinking along with the way Mary just explained it. If it was our employee, that auditor would report to us, and if they needed to go for more detailed, audit, they're still going to examine the information and bring it back to the table to us. So I think that would be important to have that employee under the board doing that, and I would feel better with that.
And that would happen either way. I think we were talking about whether it's an individual or a firm. Either way, they would report directly back to us. Is that?
Okay.
Okay. Ms. Morgan.
What we have in our policy, and what a number of districts that I looked at have, is an audit plan requirement. So essentially, the board works with whoever the internal auditor is on the audit plan for the year. If it can be handled internally, great. If it can't, then you have the opportunity to contract with a firm to do it. So it's, I think it's a flexible way of managing. Now, you had mentioned that the Finance Advisory Committee was going to make a recommendation, but you were sort of tabling it because of this internal audit requirement, and what was their, what are they looking for?
Well, my comments are sort of part of a larger statement, if that's all right. And my comments start with a plan. And so what I'd like to see happen is a potential expansion of Mr. Brown's role to include this, and us to hire out the internal audit function. And there are firms that do it and that focus just on education, and they do the entire internal audit function, including coming up with a plan with the board. So we have an independent auditor that works for us, and he manages that plan. That's his job. His job is to manage that plan. If there are changes in the timeline, or if things happen, he can't work with 7 individual board members to, meaning the internal auditor that we hire out can't work with 7 different board members. He's responsible for managing the auditing process, in addition to hopefully continuing with the internal audit functions we already have. That plan should encompass, and does encompass, according to the AG's recommendations, prevention and detection of fraud, waste, and abuse, which takes care of the forensic audit that you requested. It also,
Oh, it doesn't, that's not.
It doesn't either. But, go ahead, I'm sorry. Ms. Patrica.
it also takes care of the efficiency, promoting efficient operations, detecting areas where programs perhaps aren't working, encouraging economic and efficient operations within the district, which is what which is what Finance Advisory recommended with regard to maintenance. The other thing with regard to the Finance Advisory Committee, which I will remind you is made up of independent citizens who are experts in finance, I'd like to go to them and tell them about this discussion. They have maintenance coming in next month. What is next month? March. They have maintenance coming in March. Now, so far, they have heard from HR and they've heard from IS, and they initially thought that both of those required a deep dive efficiency audit, but after having spoken with them, they saw how some of the comparisons that Gibson made in their report, which was not an audit, in their report weren't necessarily indicative of issues. For instance, I don't think the Gibson report showed that payroll is not part of HR, is that right? So the inefficiencies in payroll were reflected against HR in that report when in fact it's not even part of HR. So, so anyways, I'd like to give Finance Advisory the opportunity to weigh in on the internal audit function, and to weigh in on whether they even think a forensic audit is necessary, given the fact that I perceive that as being part of a larger plan. To me, committing to a forensic audit now is putting the cart before the horse. I don't think we have any idea even what we're looking at. I know that I have received the same emails that you have received, and I know that they are replete with misinformation, including things that have been said about me that are inaccurate. So I have a hard time relying on that when my actual factual professional experience has been completely different from the accusations that have been made via email and via some of the public comment that has taken place before the board. So I would suggest expanding Mr. Brown's role, if he's even amenable to that. He might not even be amenable to that. And taking a holistic approach to this instead of a one-off forensic audit here and a one-off efficiency audit there. Let's put a plan together, which is basically what's required by our current policy.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, I think we're muddying the waters a little bit in talking about what I'm going to discuss this evening, because what we're talking about now is not a specific that I deem to be an emergency to clear up some of the misconceptions. What we're talking about now is what kind of plan we want going forth. And so I would separate the two things. The second thing is that I think if we go with what was in the original job description from years ago and the policies, there are many, many things that do not align with what the state is asking for in this. And for instance, yes, I could probably go with an individual who directs under certain circumstance if he or she doesn't have a deep understanding of something specific, but I think that we need to have somebody really, really top-notch. The old policies are saying things like a master's degree in business administration, or I would like to see a CPA, a certified CPA, or I believe there's another CIA, certified internal auditor. And I think this person would be not just somebody giving recommendations for efficiencies, but I think it also is going to be specifically financial accounting as well. And it doesn't matter, and I know Gibson is a firm that deals exclusively with schools, school districts. the, one of the people on the board for the internal legislative review, he himself was a forensic auditor, Mr. Caruso. I believe that's his background. And from listening to what they had to say and just kind of the climate of the room there, I'm thinking they don't see an auditor as somebody that has to be, know everything about a school district and the academics. We have chiefs for that. But it needs to be somebody who could look at other, who maybe has looked at other public institutions, who maybe has done auditing on other government agencies that are not school districts. And I believe that a CPA would be able to do that and would be able to recognize if there are certain efficiencies that we need to deal with. But to me, either now or, and I'll talk about that tonight, about the forensic audit, which I see as kind of an emergency, versus looking in the future that we have somebody that truly can deal with all of these things, because do we really want to have these questions circulating in the public about the finances of this district? And they're out there.
Madam Chair, this is kind of important because she's talking about bringing it up again tonight, and we have 5 minutes left,
Okay,
and I still feel unprepared to vote based on what she
Okay,
said.
no, and I understand. Let me take her, and then I have a comment as well. Go ahead.
2 comments. First of all, CPAs are specialized just like attorneys and everybody else. So I don't think that, getting a CPA, creating a standard of a CPA is essential. But I'm curious as to your reaction to the suggestion about the employee in-house having essentially split responsibilities, managing the internal audit function, reporting to the board, and then other functions reporting to you. I'm just curious about your reaction to that.
My reaction is, I think that if you want an auditor that is reporting to the board, it should be an auditor reporting to the board. And whether it's a firm, whether it's somebody that is an employee, it is that way it gives a little bit of that barrier and distance that I think would lend itself to the transparency that you're looking for. The other thing you've heard me say before is I would just implore the board that whoever is doing the audits, you certainly want somebody that has the expertise. I did, as you know, work with the board auditor prior to this, who was a generalist, nice person, but it was a frustrating experience because she was a generalist and really had very little knowledge of the internal workings of a public institution. And now that was my experience with one individual, okay, granted. But I do know that the concerns that come up, like Trey will rattle off some words that none of us understand, but the auditor that would be auditing his area would understand. And so that's the one thing that I would advocate for, regardless of which way you'd go.
I'd like to make a comment, well, 2. One, it looks as though we're kind of looking at one decision, whether to, first of all, the person will report to the board, but whether we will hire someone from outside to report to the board or hire someone internally that's already here that will report to the board. Is that a fair question that is on the table? I mean, I don't know what everyone else thinks. I really believe it should be an outside person, firm, whichever we decide, that is not even a current person on staff, that we should get someone entirely new. Yes?
But isn't that kind of what Gibson was? That's what we already did? Isn't that, no?
It would have been the second phase, perhaps, of what they were planning.
But
not with
different, because the internal audit function, requires a plan, like a comprehensive
Yeah. Okay, I understand
strategic
that.
plan with regard to the auditing of a school district. And that comprehensive strategic plan, according to the statute, it should be done over a 5-year period. So every 5 years, every 5 years, we're going to go through an auditing plan, and it has to be reasonable, and it has to be, sometimes it has to be altered, and there is, I mean, Gibson does it for education, and they have a staff of people that are experts in the various areas. The other piece about having somebody work for the board is familiarity. The exact issue that you brought up, Ms. Vaughn, with regard to Mr. Brown working here and developing allegiances and developing human relationships and perhaps losing some of that objectivity would happen over time if we employed somebody as well. I know that that's an issue that other districts struggle with who have an internal auditor on the staff of the board, so to speak. So I don't know how we comply with the law. I argue, as I know Mr. Martin did, that the word employee in the law has a lot of different meanings. And if you look at the staff report, the staff report refers to all of the districts that have an internal auditor now, and they include Brevard and Manatee. Now, Manatee is too small, but Brevard hires out. And in that staff report, it doesn't specifically say that Brevard would have to do anything different in order to be in compliance with the law. So I think that if you look at the word employee, I mean, you know, my husband and I are using an attorney for a personal matter right now. We have hired him. You know, we have employed his services. So what does the word employee mean? I don't think it means on payroll with benefits.
If I could just opine on that.
Exactly.
Mr. Martin did advise at least one school board member of that, and he's confirmed that with me. Which, to me, Mr. Martin always gave conservative legal advice. For me, in this circumstance, the conservative legal advice is the word employee means that the person is under your direction, not an independent contractor. However, there are divergent opinions throughout the state, one of them being Brevard, although Brevard's attorney agrees with me, interestingly enough, even though her board may not, that employee could mean that you hire an independent contractor to do this work. I mean, there is that opinion out there. I believe that's defensible. However, the conservative advice I'm giving you all is that in-person should be employed. So I don't believe there's anything saying that it can't be a firm or an individual that's outside. What does cause me concern is the language at the end of the statute that he or she shall report findings directly to the school board and its designee, which suggests it's an individual.
Well, but it still could be a representative. I mean, when you contract a firm, you still have a person that has your account.
Sure. And
so they're the ones you deal with. You don't call the firm and ask to speak to anybody.
Okay.
So, yes.
Well, I'm not an attorney. I did work a couple years at a law library.
I'm well aware of that.
Doesn't count.
Just talking with Mr. Williams, I think he our staff attorney, he's more aligned with Mr. Martin on this particular issue. But I guess, Rob, I kind of look at it, and again, I'm not an attorney, but school boards employ outside firms to provide their legal advice, and they have a lead counsel that sits at the table during board meetings. Couldn't it be something like that? If you had an auditing firm, they'd have a lead auditor that they would designate would be the person that would be reporting to this board, and then that person would have the resources to be able to hit the specific areas.
I don't think the law prohibits that. That's what I'm not saying it does. I think the word employee has meaning, however, and the statutes regarding legal counsel for the board don't use the word employee.
It's may.
So,
It's may. Hire.
Yeah, may hire or may.
Okay, for the purpose
So
of...
there's a difference there.
For the purpose of time, I don't know what, because we didn't set a goal actually in the beginning as to what we wanted to accomplish with this workshop. So can we define that? Do we want to say, go ahead and look at possibilities? do cost analysis to talk about whether individual firm, or do we vote on that at this point? We need to kind of hone it down a little bit, yes.
Well, do we ask HR to look into what, or do we hire a company to look for someone? I don't know, you know what I'm saying? I mean, I guess.
That's why I was asking.
Well, I haven't heard from all of you about that issue necessarily. We've talked about a bunch of things today, but I haven't heard from each one of you whether or not you believe it should be an in-house person or a combination of the two, like Ms. Patrica suggested, or a firm like Ms. Gittens suggested. So the direction that you're going to give me and Dr. Atkins and his staff needs to be narrowed down.
Right. So ask the three questions,
Sure.
just go around and
All right,
ask
so the
them.
first question I have is there a desire to employ an individual directly by the board? That's the first question.
That's for me.
Okay. All right. So that's simple. And is the board amenable to the current language that's in the policy that that individual will have the ability to contract out and facilitate audits in areas of expertise that the individual may not have?
Okay,
See, I see this.
you confused me there. I think the two choices are,
No.
An
Clearly, you
individual.
want an individual, but will that individual have the ability, as the current policy suggests, to use an outside firm to do a specialized type of audit?
but I still say, what you're confusing is if we hire a firm or an individual, is what I see on the table.
No, that wasn't my question. And so I'm not
Okay,
We had a 5:15 hard stop, and it's 5:17, so
but we just need to settle this part of it at
can we
least.
settle it by having another workshop on?
I think we need to.
I think we can do this quickly. I mean, don't you all think?
So the,
I don't think there's any agreement here at all.
The first question,
No, we need to
question
have
really
another
was,
Question
are
is
we
fine.
going to have an internal auditor
and the
who
answer
does
was
it all?
yes.
Well, that's the,
That was what
That's
Ms.
the
Vaughn is
statute.
basically proposing. Do we support her position, which is that we have an internal employee who does it all? That's question number one, and let's see what the board says.
Well, we're definitely
still
going to
think
have
you're-
another workshop, because one person's not going to be able to handle it
Yeah,
all.
and I'm not
And
opposed.
Mr. Brown does some of the stuff that is on the list for,
Yeah.
so it's like
Yeah, and I'm
redundant.
actually not opposed to that possibility of hiring out for specialization, so
okay.
it's,
Sorry.
yeah.
For time's sake, let's just do this. We're going to be scheduling workshop for one on the transparency and some other things that are coming up, so we can add this to that. My concern is, for one, that in March and then again in June, we will be getting our first installments of the tax of the referendum. And for transparency's sake, I personally would like to put forward that we not wait until July 1st, but that the statute says we have to have them by July 1st. But my thing is to have them as soon as we can possibly come to that conclusion, so that when we start to get those funds in, we do have the transparency and we do have the person that we can go to, not having to go to the superintendent or the staff to ask any questions and that type of thing. So that was my concern. Let me finish one more thing. I also feel that our communication process with our advisory boards, we need to look at that, because going to the advisory boards and bringing their information to us, it seems like it should go the other way, that we come to some kind of consensus and then go to the advisory boards and ask them, give us some input on these items. So you had your hand up real quick.
Yeah, the only thing I was going to say, remember, there is that oversight committee.
Right.
So the minute that anything comes,
No, I
they are going to
understand that,
be
but we as a
overseeing.
board do not have control over the oversight committee, the oversight committee would have to ask for things as well, just like we would. So having someone that is our employee and a liaison with finance, with oversight, would help I think communication with the committees, with staff, with us, it would be more of a centralized person that could do those things, and it should smooth out our communication process.
Yeah, and that's for me. So the auditor is somebody I think that should attend the oversight committee. They can come back and tell us what's going on, and we don't have to attend it. I think that they could go to the finance meetings. I think that would be part of their job as well. And just to have so that they could answer any questions. It's part of transparency for the community that, and be there for these committees. And that's what I think.
So in the interest of closing this meeting, the next meeting that we have is going to have specified outcomes.
Yes,
And I
and we
think
will
that
do an
we
agenda. Yes.
need to ask somebody on staff, Dr. Atkins, to facilitate. And I think what we need to do is to give all of our comments to that facilitator so that they can structure something that will get us through quickly, because we have to.
Well, let's agree to, and that's a good idea, but each of us needs to then agree to certain things. An individual or a firm, internal, external.
Send the questions out.
All of those things that we have brought up. And get those questions to us, and then we can do the response. We can actually give it to Mr. Dodick, and then we can decide from there who will concretize that and put it together. Is everyone in agreement with that? Consensus, please?
In agreement.
Just that he will send us questions, we will send him
Thank you.
responses, and then we will meet
We need
again.
to adjourn.
Okay.
Time is of the essence here.
This out, I think.